Thanks for joining us today for this Equipping the Saints webinar. You know, we've been getting many good questions in the Synod office about conducting your annual meetings using video conferencing as your meeting solution. So we thought we would use this week's webinar as a way to address this topic. So what do annual meetings look like during this pandemic? Well, they look different for sure. And this hour is designed to help answer questions about gathering in this way, things to consider as you follow our state laws for holding remote annual meetings, and some suggestions for creative ways to use video conferencing technology. So we've invited two people to share their wisdom with us today. First, it's very important for you to be familiar with your own congregation's constitution. We'll be looking at the area that addresses how to hold annual meetings. We have an emergency bylaw that has been created by our attorney, for example, to help you make an accommodation for voting via electronic means. And our Synod Secretary, Reverend Brad Pullman of Luther Memorial, is on the call today, and he's going to help you walk through some of those important things. Secondly, how will you actually execute your virtual annual meeting? We've invited Reverend Fred Rilling from St. John's and Prairie du Sac and his intern, Leah Holloway Nielsen, to share their experience. And they are one of those congregation that holds their annual meeting in the fall. So they've already done theirs. And I was speaking with Fred one day and learned how they did it. And I thought it was really a great approach. It's a great option for those of you who do not require written ballots, and it's certainly doable by most congregations. So he's agreed to share their learnings with us. Now, finally, before I hand it over to Bishop Joy for prayer, I want to tell you that we are recording this webinar for those who are unable to make it, or for you if you want to go back and revisit anything. All of our videos are archived and available from the Synod's website, Congregational Resources page. So you go to Resources and then go to for Congregations. And now I will hand it over to Bishop Joy to open us with a word of prayer.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see all of you and to greet you. We're getting so close to Christmas. My Advent reading has come from this Advent source book that perhaps some of you recognize. And today I picked one that is a reading from Charles Borromeo from the 16th century. The Church asks us to understand that Christ, who came once in flesh, is prepared to come again. When we remove all obstacles to his presence, he will come at any hour and moment to dwell spiritually in our hearts, bringing with him the riches of his grace. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we are prepared for your coming. Help us, Lord, to remove those obstacles that are in front of us this day. Obstacles of worry and sickness, weariness, despair. Obstacles of feeling like perhaps we have just too much left to do. Lord, you know the obstacles that we have in our hearts and minds this day. So help us, Lord, to cast them upon you, that we might be indeed ready for Emmanuel to come. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And now I'm going to toss it to Brad, who going to take over the conversation and get us going today.
Thank you, Bishop Joy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk you through some of the constitutional stuff. Some of it relates to whether you're meeting in person or virtually anyway, just as a sort of review, and then what the wrinkles are, at least constitutionally, if you're planning to hold a remote annual meeting. First, the 2019 Model Constitution included a section for congregation councils and congregations to meet by electronic means. So if your congregation is one of those that has already done the update to the 2019 Model Constitution, which is about 30-ish of our congregations so far, you're already in good shape. You would find the issue in Chapter 10, Section 8, where you can hold meetings and council meetings by electronic means. The key provision there is may hold meetings remotely, including electronically and by telephone conference, as long as there is an opportunity for simultaneous oral communication. Right? So if you're planning to do a virtual one, you have to use the kind of setup that would allow for simultaneous verbal communication, like the Zoom meeting does. You can ask a question, people can respond, so on. So you can make motions on the floor, so on and so forth. If your congregation has not done an update to the 2019 Model Constitution, and of course you can't call for a congregational meeting to have one remotely if you can't do it remotely, the ELCA has provided, particularly our Synod Attorney, David Moore, who's on this call, a boilerplate emergency bylaw. The state of Wisconsin allows corporations to approve emergency bylaws. You can find that on our Synod website, and your congregation council would need to approve that, fill it out. It's pretty straightforward. And that will allow your congregation to meet in electronic ways. It's essentially approving the text of 10.08. And then you can just proceed with any annual or congregational meetings you need until the pandemic is over. I think the language in the emergency bylaw is until this corporation can meet in one room, right? So the bylaw would remain in effect until that time. Am I supposed to pay attention to the chat, Vicki? Oh yeah, no, she's put that
I'm on it. I'm putting the links to those resources.
they're all on the websites. Wonderful resources there. The other things, of course, to pay attention to is how you're going to vote, even if you can do oral communication and so on. The good news is the vast majority of our congregations do not require paper ballots. I think there's only 2 or 3 congregations that do, which gets complicated. I myself am not entirely clear on if you're one of those 2 or 3, how to do that. Between the bishop and David Moore, maybe they'd have a better sense as to whether or not a Zoom vote qualifies as, quote, a paper ballot or not. I'm not clear on that, but the vast majority of our congregations don't require it. So it's not really an issue for most of us, the vast majority, where you can take votes. Zoom platform allows for that, and it's possible that Fred and Leah will be sharing a little bit of that. I know my congregation's busy getting ready for their annual meeting, and we've been doing some practice voting at our staff meeting and trying to figure out how to do that. And it's fairly straightforward. It's a little bumpy. It's also tricky on Zoom or other virtual meetings is to be clear on who can vote and who can't. You need to do that even in person, but it gets a little more complicated if you've got multiple people on the same screen. How do you get the multiple people to vote, and how do you make sure that they're all voters? Right. It's just a slightly different problem than if you'd have if you were doing it in person. And again, maybe Fred and Leah will share some ways to sort of do that tactfully. I don't know that I have too much else. Oh, in chapter, is it 7 or 8, where it defines voting members? Chapter 8 on membership. Most of us know what a voting member is. I learned from Bishop Joy that you have to have voted and communed in the current or preceding calendar year, but you don't have to count 2020 as the current or preceding calendar year. The ELCA is sort of waiving that. So you're really looking at anybody who's voted and voted and communed since 2018. Because for many of our congregations, you may not have had people commune in 2020.
You also meant to say, I think, given.
Yes, thank you.
Voted.
Financially given and communed. That's what I meant to say. Not what I said, Fred. So thank you for correcting me. Yeah. And of course, it's confirmed. Yeah. Questions that you all have?
And we'll just open it up to the group.
Yeah. How many of your congregations are going to do? I'll ask you a question. If you raise a hand, if your congregation is going to need to do an emergency bylaw. Yeah. At least looks like maybe close to half. And again, you do not need to submit those to the synod, but if you would like to do so, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I've had a few congregations submit them to me, and I just put them in the file. Good. And most of you, I'm guessing, have your annual meetings coming up, or if they were already over, you wouldn't be on less likely to be at the meeting. Well, I'll just hang around if there's any other questions, and probably turn it over. Who am I turning this over to, Vicki?
Let us just say at this point, if you have questions that come to mind after we move over to Fred, feel free to write them in the chat area. You all know how to do that. Go down to the chat and type in your question to everyone. And Nancy has just written one. We've been holding outdoor drive-in services and plan to continue those. Is there anything special we need to know?
Bring a blanket if you're going to do your annual meeting outside. Yeah, I don't think there is, except I don't know how you would do voting. Right, you have to allow for simultaneous communication. So how that all sort of, that's the question you need to think about. If everybody's sitting in their car, it's different if they're, participating in worship in that regard. Yeah, can you, all sorts of good questions coming up. Can you delay your annual meeting until later in the year? Yes, unless your constitution tells you you can't. Right, the model constitution you need to have an annual meeting. But for many of our congregations, the bylaws or the continuing resolutions will indicate, your annual meeting must take place in December or must take place in January. That gets a little more complicated if that's what your constitution says. By index card and microphone from Nancy. You take the card to car, I suppose.
I like that very much, Nancy. I've spoken with, through this scenario with other congregations, and the reason I like that is because that really is the spirit of allowing people to have real-time interaction, which is one of the legal requirements that we have. My concern, if you make people get out of their car to come up to a microphone in the dead of winter, I'm not so sure that's really honoring the spirit of, offering it to be interactive. I suppose legally it's okay, but I'm just worried that people might be encumbered, or it might be unsafe for some people too. We've had many people slip in our parking lot, breaking limbs, so it's not really such a great idea, I don't think, to expect people to get out of their vehicles. Bishop, you look pensive. Do you have another thought? No, no, you're good. Okay.
I think it also would depend whether the items that are up for your agenda at your annual meeting are fairly standard, or you're voting on some rather controversial things, or that could be controversial. I think if you have a fairly plain vanilla annual meeting, I think you'll be, it'll go a little easier no matter how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Wireless mic. Yeah.
Tim Hansen's posing drive-in worship with free conference call.
Yeah, so Peter Heidi does it with his worship service. He uses free conference call, and we do drive-in worship with an FM transmitter. And so it would be possible to do your meeting through the transmitter, but then to have everybody call in on the pre-conference call so you could have instant communications that way.
Sure, and you could do it that way. How would you take your vote then?
We don't absolutely need paper ballot, so I don't think it would matter too much for us. But even if you needed to, you could. We hand out communion stuff. You could hand out ballots.
Sure.
And then collect them as well.
Sure.
Vicki, this is Peter.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
That I belong to a couple of organizations of blind people that have been doing this for years, and that they simply set up two different cell phone numbers, get two cell phones with separate numbers, and you can dial in on one if you're for and the other one if you're against, and that all you have to do is collect the calls that come in as for your vote, so that it doesn't that it allows for two people that are listening on the same phone to call in twice, and that we did elections last year for one group was 3,000 people and the other one was 8,000, and that it doesn't take any longer than ballot counting under normal circumstances.
Again, I think that, Peter, that makes sense, so long as, again, people can debate and discuss in real time.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, that they get to debate on the primary conference call, and then the vote is done by separate cell phone. Another
question that came up in the chat, which is a tough question. What about people who don't have computers? Yeah, and I'm assuming it also means without a cell phone or any other device that you could potentially do a Zoom call with.
Which is why we do free conference call at my church.
Right. But to this person's question, it's tricky, I think, how you're going to, I don't know, it'd be interesting if anybody else has ideas for how you get participation if you're planning to do a virtual annual meeting with those who can't participate virtually. Yeah,
Cell phone, you call from the house.
Yeah, I mean, yes, if you could do the technology to do video conference and then essentially audio conference at the same time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if you do a Zoom call, you always have that option, like Peter's on via audio only right now.
Yep.
And I like that combination because you have so many applications, technologies available to you to take voting on the Zoom platform. If you use polling or you use the participant area to raise your hand and answer in a positive, they're just a lot more options that way. So it satisfies people that have both a computer and a telephone.
Vicki, maybe it will help if we do our presentation, because it sounds like we're wandering into that kind of how do you do it thing.
Yeah.
And that might answer some of those questions and bring up more.
Sure. Let's go ahead and do that. And then still, again, if you have any constitutional questions for Brad, he's going to stay on the line the entire time. So let's turn it over to Fred and Leah.
Fred, I'll share my screen.
Yeah, if you want to share your screen.
Mm-hmm.
So we put together this document, or Leah, I should say, put together this document about how we came about to do ours this year. A couple things about our context. One is that we have a tradition of about 15-minute annual meetings. They're very, we're not being contentious. We don't get cranky with each other on a regular basis. And so it's pretty much, people just, we've built a lot of trust. So if you have a situation like that, I think it helps your constitution or your meeting go along quickly, whatever format you use. And if you have a congregation that wants to argue about every single thing, no matter what, it's going to be a problem no matter what. So I think that's just a context issue for us to start off with. The other thing that I heard people talking about was how to vote and who was voting. One of the things that we wanted to make sure is that whoever voted was capable of voting. So if you have 3 people in a car or wherever the situation is and they all vote, the question is, as Brad talked about, are they actually voting members? And you need to be able to identify that. And if you don't know who's in the cars and they're voting, then you haven't done your due diligence. And so that was the challenge we thought about a lot, was how do we identify who is actually a voting member? And what that meant was we had to know that information. And so in our case, we have a great gift in Linda Hines, a longtime person who's been in our office and other positions on our staff for a long, long time. She has that information and knows those individuals through her process of being here and what she does for our financial pieces and things. And so she'd be able to identify if somebody was in a group going, well, that person really isn't a member, even though they might look like one to everybody else because they've been around forever. So you need to be able to identify that, I think, up front before you argue about how to do things. You need to be able to figure out who's eligible, and that may be problematic. We really worried about offending people, and making it clear that we weren't trying to do that. That was a council kind of process that we went through. So however you do that, that has to get done. Otherwise, all the work you've done is pretty much can be called into question, I think, especially if you have a contentious vote coming up. So our context is we need 50 people or more of voting that can be voting members to have a meeting. And so we first have all had to identify that, move on. But as our document shows, we did a lot of work before the meeting, thought about, who's going to actually run things, a Zoom host. And so we did that. We made sure that it wasn't our president or anybody else who we needed to be involved in process. We needed somebody just simply to do that part of it. We went with, because we're using Zoom, we decided everything was going to be a voice vote process. And we decided we would use breakout rooms to be able to count. So imagine you have 50 people in a meeting, and you have 5 breakout groups and 10 people in each group. And then somebody, whoever that person was that's in charge of taking the vote, would then go ahead and say, hey, here's what we've got. We've got 10 people who said yes to this. And then they would report back when they came back into a large group and say, group 1, 10, yes, no, 0, no, and move on like that. That was something that we thought was helpful. And we also then allowed or made sure that when we were in small groups that nobody would talk about whatever it was they were voting on. That was already done by that time. We tried to make sure that people knew how to do this. One of the biggest, I think, hurdles to all of this is making sure people feel comfortable doing whatever they're doing. Just because we can do something doesn't mean that people will be able to do it. And so we did a lot of pre-meeting meetings for people to get online, to practice how to do different things, to call in on the phone, all that kind of stuff, and made sure very clearly, especially in our context, that many people do not have capacity for internet service. And so the phone call part of it was really important for us to identify as being critical, and making sure those individuals really knew how to do that. Then the other piece of it was just, we wanted to make sure that we knew who was calling in. So we said to people, hey, you're gonna come to the meeting, please let us know you're coming. And so we got that information before the meeting. So then again, Linda could say, oh yeah, all these people are members, or no, these people aren't. And then we had to make sure we pay attention to that. Along with the fact that we knew who was going to call in or be part of this, we also then had to spend some time changing their names in the process of being online. So we could say, like Peter's number comes up, just his phone number. And I know his phone number, but nobody else does. So we would change Peter's phone number to Peter Heidi. And that way people knew it was Peter Heidi, or Peter and Susan Heidi, depending if Susan was there as well. Then we used a PowerPoint piece of it to help put agendas and budget information and all that kind of stuff, share the screen kind of thing, and did a lot of that beforehand. And again, just making sure people knew that if they had questions beforehand, we would make sure we would answer them. And we did a lot of pre-work, and I think that's really part of the success of our meeting was a lot of the pre-work that we did. During the meeting, if you want to push up.
Hop in?
Oh,
Frank,
yes, please.
I'm
sorry.
I know some folks have talked about the polling and the raise hand functions of Zoom and the ability to use that to vote. And I just wanted to speak to briefly why we chose to do breakout rooms as opposed to the polling or the raising hands. And we realized that with the number of individuals who are going to be coming, who are going to be in the same Zoom box, that keeping track of that So for example, if my husband and I were both voting members and he was here with me, for the person who's tallying votes to keep track of making sure we only voted twice, as well as trying to possibly vote, in the same way twice. And that same thing goes for the Zoom polling. We found that to be doing a lot of work twice, and that's why we did the breakout rooms, knowing that not everybody is comfortable stating out loud the direction that they're voting, but as Brett has said, doing a lot of that pre-work and telling people up front, you are going to need to state a vote out loud. This is why, and not to be a little too blunt, but hopefully if you choose to go this way, people will be able to be respectful of other people's votes if they vote differently than they do by hearing other people's votes. So I just wanted to address that because I know I saw that in the chat earlier. Thanks.
Thank you, Leah. You want to push up the screen a little bit there? Thanks. And this document, we sent a copy to Vicki, so if you want it, or if you just want to send us an email or whatever, it's there. During the meeting, obviously, encouraging people to show up early, that was just a helpful piece of it. That way people had a chance, we knew they were there, we were changing names, things like that, kind of doing the work that we needed to do, making sure there wasn't anybody who shouldn't be voting or potential people who might not be able to vote. And then we identified, like for instance, people that couldn't vote besides people who aren't supposed to vote would be like maybe a pastor wouldn't vote on something because of a conflict of interest or something like that. The roll call, again, trying to make sure we knew who was there. Sometimes a person was on the screen, but they had other people that weren't on the screen, but were going to vote. So in the case of a family, maybe there's dad is on the screen, but there's 3 other people in their family that actually can vote technically. So making sure that we knew who all those people were. And then we did a lot of reviewing, did a lot of stuff that we did at this annual meeting or the Synod meeting, Synod Assembly stuff, helping people to kind of do things. And realizing that even when you do all of that, there still are going to be people who can't figure out, for whatever reason, how to raise their hand. Like for instance, I still cannot see people raising their hands on my screen. Don't know why. I don't know how I'm looking. I just can't do it. And one of these days I will be able to do it. But on each device it changes. So you also have to know that, along with the fact that not every family has a single device for every person, obviously. So you're going to have multiple people on the screen in some fashion or form. So practice as much of all that stuff as you can. And then making sure, again, in our situation, we have a lot of people who were calling out on phones. They tended to be the people that were the most worried about the process of being able to connect. So we did a lot of work. And when I say we, I mean Leah did a lot of work making sure those people practice that process. And so she'd go online for 2 hours or 3 hours at a time and have people call her, practice making sure doing things well. And then I think one of the things that was really helpful for us is the unanimous consent vote. So unless somebody had a problem with something, we didn't have to break out into small groups or breakout rooms for every single vote. The only one we actually did was for our budget. And I think the budget passed unanimously. So that was, but it was, oh, we didn't? Or saying no?
It did not. It was
Okay.
very closely unanimous, but there was probably about 2 dozen votes
Okay.
against.
All right, very good. There may be a number, thanks for reminding me of that. There may be a number of you out there where your budget this year is going to be significantly different than you would have thought in a normal year. Ours was one of those. And so we made some hard decisions that didn't weren't appreciated by everybody, but we also knew there were going to be those decisions to be made. And so before the meeting, we talked a lot about that. And I think Brad had mentioned something about, doing a lot of work before, so that when you get to the meeting, you're not rehashing a lot of those kinds of things. It's already been talked about or had opportunities to talk about it. And then finally, let's see, we did agenda, all that kind of stuff by unanimous consent. And then we got into our breakout rooms and like I said, didn't have any conversation about the vote. It was just vote. And then afterwards tried to do some time with people and say, how did it go? We're learning as we go along in this whole process. How did it go? So.
Well, thank you, Fred and Leah. Did you have anything else, Fred?
No, I was going to say, Leah, do you have anything else to add?
The only other thing that I would maybe add is for our breakout rooms, we did manual breakout rooms to ensure. So as you saw, we had 2 council members who are essentially the proctors of each breakout room. I ran the Zoom part of it because I did not have a conflict of interest as a non-voting person at St. John's. So what I did is, as people were coming in, I was manually setting up the breakout rooms beforehand and putting the 2 council member pairs that we wanted in particular breakout rooms. And then after that, it was just kind of making it an even number, leaving out people who needed to be left out and what have you. So that's how we ensured that happening. If you're not familiar with how breakout rooms work, I'll volunteer myself as a person to talk to about that. And I would love to walk with you through that if that is something that you would like shown in a little bit greater detail.
Yeah, that was something I thought was really genius of you guys, is to invite council members to be those facilitators in each of those breakout rooms. Because they're going to be respectful of people's time, and it's good for them to have the thumb on the pulse of what's going on in your congregation too, so they get to hear those conversations. That was a great idea. So breakout rooms, and Robin Zimmerman on our staff and I am certainly happy to help you with any of those Zoom related questions as well. I think Robin and I have been talking about, if you think this is helpful, let us know, holding Zoom trainings by congregation. Whereas Robin first started out training people, individually people came in to trainings twice a week. We thought it would be helpful if you decide you want to use Zoom as your technology for your annual meeting, and you want to get your people up to speed on Zoom and have some extra practice with it, let us know, because we would be happy to schedule those by congregation as a resource for you. Practice makes perfect. Yes, Fred.
One other thing to mention, we actually were doing parking lot services prior to that day. We actually did a service that day, and then had our Zoom annual meeting afterwards. So we just thought it was, we were able to take care of the things we needed to take care of easily in relationship to having to try to figure out who's in the cars and things like that. So
Sure.
It also allowed a lot more people to be involved that would not have driven in for the parking lot service.
Fred, did you mean to say we had a Zoom service and then the annual meeting?
Yes. Yeah, we had a parking lot service, and then we had the annual meeting. Yes, that's what I meant to say. Thank you. No.
Okay, other questions while we have these wonderful resources available to you? From Daryl Gunderson, if we can have an emergency by law for electronic meetings, why can't we have an emergency by law to change the date of the meeting?
David Moore, you gotta answer
Yeah,
that?
David Moore.
Okay.
No, I see the question.
Okay,
Yeah, I can't answer that off the top. If you can give me a minute, I'll take a look at that.
okay, we'll come back to you.
It's a very interesting question. I wonder, does it have something to do with whether it's in the bylaws or the main body of the Constitution?
Well, certainly if it's a continuing resolution, the council can go ahead and change it. That's an easy one. But you're right, Joy, if it's a bylaw, which it normally would be, because I think the model constitution states that the date of the annual meeting will be set in the bylaws, I think is the constitutional provision. So, but yeah, I don't know.
But some of the older constitutions that might still be around this, and it may state it in the main body of the Constitution.
That's true. Yeah, some of the older ones.
Yes,
that would be
Matt.
the answer.
While David's still looking that up, Matt, in answer to your question, there have been other synods actually that have used survey tools to take their votes. And if you want to give me a call after Christmas, when is your annual meeting, Dave? Is it after Christmas? You have enough time. If you have enough time, give me a call because I can find out more about how they did that. There are pros and cons to using that, but it is doable. I've even heard from some synods that those congregations requiring paper ballots have actually asked their members to, during their annual meeting, get in their cars and drive to the church and hand their paper ballot to their council members who serve as tellers at the doors. So, you know, you're only limited by your own imagination here. And if you require a paper ballot, there are ways to make that happen. So, and they even went to their shut-ins. So the shut-ins were able to vote too. They had designated people who would drive to their home and get their paper ballot and drive it to the church for them.
So Debbie has a comment in the chat that says, our council voted to change our meeting to a date uncertain. And she says, I take it that wasn't legal. So if your constitution says it has to be in a certain month, then no, that likely was not legal to change.
Well, and Brad, if they have certain language in their constitution that they would like you to review, would you be happy to do that? You know, just email that to Brad and email that page and he'd be happy to weigh in on that. Well, the consequences, unfortunately, of not following your constitution or bylaws is that you can lose your non-for-profit status. So, you know, your constitution is not a list of suggestions. It's actually a legal document. And it determines how you constitute yourself legally. So you really don't want to mess with it.
Roxy had a question. I'm not clear why you would do it that way. Can you take a voice vote and then follow up with a paper vote? Can you give me an example of what that might look like? If, for example, you know, you approve your budget by voice vote, then it's approved. There really would be no need to do a paper ballot after the fact. That would be another issue for your leadership. For those congregations that are thinking, you know what, we're just going to delay our annual meeting from, say, January to July. You'd also think through what programmatic issues involve if you don't have an approved budget. It's not really a constitutional issue, but it's certainly something that you would obviously have to address in some way, shape, or form. Oh, your congregation is one of those requires a paper. If your congregation requires a paper vote, then the voice vote is not a vote. Yeah. You're going to have to find a way to do a paper vote, which again, we had some suggestions already raised here as well. Although David, I suppose it's the same sort of question. Can you have an emergency way to say, well, you're going to sort of not do it that way either? I don't really know. Do you know?
Do you need more time on that one, David?
Sorry, I'm dealing with my technology and my statute book at the same time. Recalling how we got to the issue of an emergency bylaw was the statute, which I was just attempting to review with limited success, was the, sorry, and I'm once again, sorry, I don't have that up in front of me. And again, I'm struggling with my own technology. Hang on.
We have it on the web. If you want, we have it on our website. I can pull it up for you.
No, that's okay. I got it. It was one.
Okay.
There's a provision that allows for amendment of bylaws by directors and members at section 181.1021 of the Wisconsin statutes. And it says that a corporation's board may amend or repeal the corporation's bylaws or adopt new bylaws, except to the extent that any of the following applies, and that is that the articles or another provision of the law reserves that power exclusively to the members, or the members the members should specifically direct that the board of directors, in this case the congregational council, can adopt that the congregation has adopted something that specifically provides that the council cannot change it. In deciding and discussing the possibility of the emergency bylaw provision, we took that into account and also looked at the fact that the Department of Financial Institutions issued a letter sometime in April that basically said that the attitude towards the state is going to be one of no harm, no foul on these kinds of things, which is to say that as long as there is a good faith attempt being made to address the situation, the word good faith now has way more meaning in the law than it perhaps did in the past. So I guess my off the cuff, somewhat off the cuff impression would be that if the congregation is not able to meet in the month provided for any number of reasons, and a good faith attempt is being made to do it as soon as possible, that I don't think that a court in this state and many other states is going to create a problem. What may, as you know, create problems is members of the congregation who are more inclined toward following the procedures. So that's why I think that if you're able to conduct the meeting in January, it's important to do so. If that's not possible, if there are simply overriding issues, that you're likely to be given some benefit of the doubt in the event the question becomes critical. I think in cases where we've had issues like the transfer of real estate or something where you really wanted to make certain that the I's were dotted and the T's crossed, it becomes more important. If it's an issue that's not of that nature, like, well, electing of officers, budget, it depends on how controversial it is, but generally, I think that we are finding some room in the statutes for the situation that we've been faced with. So sorry, that's a long answer to a short question, but I think the if an emergency bylaw were adopted with an express intent, a resolution explaining why and what the intent is as to when the meeting will be held, I think that would be defensible. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily encourage that, but I think that's a possibility.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I would just second what David is saying. There's been a lot of chatter within the Conference of Bishops about similar things. And I think the spirit of what David is saying is also what's kind of been echoed from ELCA attorneys as well, that you should try your best to follow exactly what's in your Constitution. And if you can't, just show the good faith that you're trying your best to accomplish it in the best alternate way possible.
Okay, any other, I see some comments, but any other specific questions for Brad or Fred? Let me ask you if you would let us know, are you getting more comfortable? Are you getting ideas for your annual meetings? Are you getting more comfortable with that? Let's have Robin put a poll together. She's got one that, Robin, do you have the poll created for the laity rostered? Okay, we have two polls. Are you a rostered minister or lay leader? If you could answer that right now. Are you satisfied we've got everybody in, Robin?
Well, we got about 85%, and I will share the results.
So, whoa, that's great. We have 55% are rostered, 45% are laity. Can I ask you to do a question on the fly?
Sure, might take me a second, but.
Okay, I want to know if you're feeling more comfortable with this or if you feel you need another session on this.
Okay.
And in the meantime, Jack has a question. My question about our usual voting members not being online. Usual voting members not being online. Jack, can you give that to us verbally?
So you got me?
Yep.
So the normal voting members at our congregation are people who are not online. They're not receiving any of our online stuff. So to change the annual meeting is going to be complicated because that's the people who come. So if we attempt to change in good faith the annual meeting, can we do a paper ballot with them at home and say we need to do this because of these reasons? Our best suggestion is this. Is that a possibility? Can we do it by a paper vote using one of the methods that's been suggested?
Again, to go back to where we started, your meeting has to be able so that people can participate live in time. Yes, there may be ways you could do, as part of that, a paper ballot, but I don't think it's a sort of thing where you could just sort of send it out before the meeting, if that's what you mean, Jack.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the issue is that a fair portion of them would not show up no matter,
right?
Currently, for those that are not coming. So a fair portion of them would not participate anyway if we tried to have the annual meeting on the one hand. And so then we might have a majority that would vote to move the annual meeting, though the ones who would come to the annual meeting that we would have on time would vote to go ahead and do what the business at the moment. So, I mean, we're kind of in a, it's a catch-22 for us currently.
Mhm.
Jack,
Yes,
I'm wondering, because Zoom allows for a phone call, would people be willing to call in and have a group conversation that way?
we can ask that again, but they have not been willing to do that. And we don't do Zoom because people are not willing to do Zoom. So,
So none of your people would do Zoom. None of your people would do Zoom,
I'm not
is what you're
sure.
saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we would get a quorum to begin with Zoom. We haven't even had council meetings on Zoom because of this. So,
And Jack, what is your total assembly size normally? How many people?
somewhere in the 40, 45 range is what I've been told. So
that would be fairly manageable as a conference call with some kind of organization as to how they would respond. You know, you could divide them alphabetically, say anyone with last names A through F. If you have a question or a comment, you know, there are ways to organize an audio conference call. Coming from somebody who had 20 years of audio teleconferencing in my background, I can help you with that.
all right.
And that's what Peter Heidi has done essentially, is gone to the lowest common denominator. Yeah, and so you have a similar situation. So if you have people that are not willing to do Zoom, then audio conference calling is probably your best your best solution.
And that then qualifies for the ability to have discussion during the vote.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll be talking more about that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, on a related one that was in the chat, could you put all the questions requiring a vote printed and mailed to the members prior to the meeting and have them dropped off at church by a certain date? Probably not, because again, you have to do sort of live conversation, and you don't know what amendments might happen. You might have, you approve the 2021 budget, yes or no, but at the meeting, somebody makes an amendment and changes it. So without knowing where you'll end up, it's hard to do ahead of time. Something that was just as, I do know one congregation that had a Zoom meeting, then after the amendments and after the dust had settled, they said, all right, you got an hour to vote, and people could drive in and drop off their vote. Right? That sort of works, but only as an addition to a live meeting. And that might be also one way to get at a paper ballot issue if you absolutely had to.
Yep, that's exactly the way the synod that I talked about had their congregations do it. That required paper ballot. They drove in during the meeting, during that hour period of time, and then used their council members as tellers at the church to collect those ballots. And those council members could then verify that the person who was handing them the ballot in the vehicle was indeed their ballot. That's important. You have to be able to verify the integrity of that vote for credentialing there. Okay, Robin, let's test the waters. How do you feel about annual meetings? No sweat, feeling better, sort of? Help me. Excellent. Well, we should have taken that poll before we started, right?
We could have done it both times, yeah.
Well, every time we do these things, we're doing them for two purposes. We want to be an example of things you could do in your own meetings, but also we want to hear from you and keep our thumb on the pulse. All right. Well, it sounds like this has been helpful. We do have a couple minutes left, though, if there are any questions or comments, suggestions, ponderings.
Vicki, one thing just to add to the thing is that if for some reason your congregation is still going, I don't think this is a good idea, or I don't think I want to do this, or whatever. And if it would help to have somebody like myself who's already done this, and be able to speak to it in person with a member of your council or a Zoom meeting with the council, I'd be more than happy to do that. I know Leah's already volunteered to do some aspects of the Zoom piece of it, but I know sometimes it's just helpful to put a face to something that says, yeah, we did this, it was scary, it worked out, no one died,
No, that's very generous. Thank you. How about if I put your email address, Fred, at the bottom of the document? Because most people have requested that. And
Sure.
They can email you. Would you prefer email or phone?
Email.
Okay. All right. One of the things too that I want to point out, there's a lot of different ways in moderating teleconferences, a lot of good tips on how to organize them, how to get participation. But one of the things I really want to point out to you is give people thinking time. You don't have to rush when you're on a video conference. People need extra time to get their thoughts together. And I know sometimes that white noise can seem like an eternity, but it really serves a purpose. So don't be afraid to just have silence for a while people gather their thoughts. Or in the case of our Synod Assembly, we visualize people actually trying to figure out the technology before they asked a question, because it was also very new. So give people extra time to get acclimated. The other recommendation, general recommendation I would have for everybody before we make announcements here is, if you can do a dry run with your people the day before, we highly recommend that. We did that for Synod Assembly, and I don't think we would have been as successful as we were if we had not done that dry run. So it gives people time to practice so they're more proficient and more comfortable on the day when it really, really matters. So consider that as well.
Vicki, can I add one thing
Yes.
on reflection?
Yes.
On the whole concept of the emergency bylaw, if the feeling is that we simply can't do this the way we normally would, or the way it's called for under our bylaws, by all means, council then should adopt a resolution that explains what they're doing instead and why, and what the plan is. That, more than anything, will go a long ways to proving or to establishing the good faith that's necessary in the event you have that worst case scenario of somebody challenging an action that was taken.
Good thought. Good counsel. And what I have heard, and I think this holds true at the congregational level as it did at the Synod Assembly level, is communicate, communicate, communicate. You can't communicate too much. This is a new thing, so just make sure you put things in writing in the usual channels of communication that you use for your congregation, and be very thorough in that and be repetitive with that. And again, we're here as a resource. If you have any questions, Fred has opened his door. Brad is always available to talk to people about their constitutions as secretary of our synod. He's open to that and happy to do that, so use him as a resource as well. Just a couple announcements before we close. We hope you enjoyed and received our Synod's Christmas greeting this year. It was a new thing that we did. We're excited about it. We like the idea that you can share it and cast a wide net with it rather than a printed Christmas card, which is nice to receive too. But this way you can share it on your social media or with whomever you want. We provided two versions, 3.5 minute and a 6 minute. We know you're working those into your worship services, so we wanted to be flexible because we know you're sensitive about how long your worship services are for this online time of worshiping. And then secondly, Bishop Joy did record a sermon for your use for December 27th, and that's on our Synod website. And if you can't find it, just email Robin or me, and we'll be able to direct you where on the Synod website that is. It's been posted to the Congregational Resources page on the website. Bishop Joy?
No, it hasn't. Sorry, no, it hasn't.
Oh,
No, because it's a sermon, it's not out there publicly. It is on the, right now it's on the directory page. So,
right.
So those rostered leaders that have access to the directory page can pull it up there.
Yes.
And then we will premiere it on the YouTube channel on Sunday morning, the 27th of December.
Okay, so go to Who We Are directory, enter in the password, and if you don't know that, Robin and I can also help you with that. And on that page is where you will find the sermon. Sorry, Robin told me that. I just wigged out. So
It
yeah,
also has the transcript of it for anyone who is needing that for homebound who don't have internet access or
Right.
computer accessibility.
Okay, Bishop, this is your invitation. Do you have any final comments before we close?
I just want to say thank you to Brad and Fred and Leah and also David for leading today's conversation. And I hope that all of you found it very helpful, and to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. And thanks for being here. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for the next Equipping the Saints conversation.
Thanks for being with us today. It's always better with you here. Have a great day.